Gather round, everyone. The Swamp Dweller has some more campfire tales to share. One of the most popular topics on this channel have always been camping stories. You guys have sent in tons of great and creepy stories over the past few weeks, and I know these ones will scare you tonight. Personally, I love to camp and explore nature, but these subscribers think twice now before entering the woods. If you have a story you would like to share on the show, submit it at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. Now, let's get into these allegedly true, creepy camping stories. So this story takes place in the late summer of 2016. I and my friend, who we will call Jay in this story, decided to take a camping trip to our secret spot in the Montana mountain range. A little background. We were not drunk in this story, and Jay is a pretty chill dude. So we started to set up camp at around 5 before Jay decided to go hunting. So we went out to hunt, and at around 6 we got some good game. We got a pretty good sized deer before we started to head back at around 8. That was when we both heard this awful sound. It was like a howl mixed with a growl, so we thought it was probably just the wind. We moved on by the time we got back to camp though, as it was almost dark out. We got the fire going and began the cooked deer that we got around 9. It was then we heard the same noise again, but this time closer, and Jay saw a head poking out from the bushes that were right in front of us. We froze, at which point the head went back into the bushes. After a few more hours, we started to head to bed. It was around 12 o'clock when I woke up and saw the shadow in the tent. The fire was still going when we saw it. I don't know if it was a skinwalker or a wendigo or whatever monsters are actually out in the woods. But that night was one of the most restless of my life. It was a July night, warm with a chill breeze. I was staying at my friend Aiden's house for his birthday. Some of my friends, Miles and Jason, were also staying. So we decided to stay in a tent in the backyard so we could stay up and also not disturb anyone because we're quite loud. Earlier in the day, when I first showed up, my friend Aiden told me that his chickens had been coming up missing. So when we were in the tent, I remembered, and I kinda freaked out, but I wanted to have a good time, so I just continued to laugh and hang out. The later I got, the more the thought got to me. It was around 10 or so. I told Aiden's little brother to come to our tent because I was worried about him. Later that night, the fire died down, so we had to use our flashlights on our phones. Everything kept feeling edgy to me, but I did not want to tell my friends, so I did not look like a little girl in front of them. I tried to just play it off, but eventually, things took a turn. We heard noises outside of the tent. Jason could not take it anymore and got scared and wanted to go into the house. I told Aiden's little brother to go into the house with him. After that, it was like 11 and things got more and more creepy. It was only Aiden, Miles, and me now. I was fine until something hit the tent. Then I got nervous and frightened, but I just thought to myself, it's probably just a chicken, so my fear went down. It was around 11:30 and things kept going. This time, it sounded as if a 7-foot tall animal ran through the corn right beside the tent. I knew this time it was no chicken, but when I heard what sounded like a bear roar, that was broken. The thing is, we had no bears where I lived. It's just about 12, and I thought to myself, I'm very tired, and I don't want to let any animal or whatever it was mess up my good name at my friend's birthday party. So, we all walked outside of the tent looking around. We saw nothing at all, until I looked at the chicken coop, and what I saw haunts me till this day. It was a tall figure, all black with long claws. I have read about and seen pictures of a skinwalker in its natural form, and if this is not one, I don't know what it was. It scared me so bad. I literally screamed as loud as possible and jumped into the tent, banging up my knees in the process. As the others get into the tent, they question me about what happened. I didn't tell them as I didn't want to scare them. The rest of that night, I did not sleep for what I was ready for anything to strike. Thankfully, I never saw it again. When this event happened, I was about 10 years old. I am currently 15 years old and a female. Another thing is I didn't have a strong bladder at the time, and when I was camping, my uncle took us somewhere in Washington that was close to Canada. My uncle had his friends with him as well. They had 3 kids and 2 girls whom I played with during the camping trip, and a boy whom played with us as well. I was still the oldest of the children, but that didn't bother me. Fast forward to nighttime, and everyone is going to sleep. About midnight, I woke up with a really bad urge to pee. I whispered to my uncle that I was going to the bathroom, and he just rolled over. I opened the tent door, having to go really bad. After stepping out carefully, I heard a big twig snap behind me. I looked, and to my horror, there were 3 weird hairless things. I wasn't sure what they were. Their eyes were like those of what you would see in night vision goggles. They were really skinny and on all 4s. They had human hands and feet, but they had claws that were sharp and a few strands of random hair atop of their head. I ran back into the tent, and well, I think you can understand why the sleeping bag wasn't clean after that. I don't believe I ever told my uncle about it because in the morning, I thought that I was just really paranoid and hallucinating. But the thing is, I'm a really good kid and never took any drugs or drinks or anything that could possibly make me hallucinate. I'm not sure what it is I saw, but I've never seen anything like it again, and to this day, I like to believe it was just my wild and vivid imagination. I was on summer break and went camping with my friend and his parents. We went to the lake during the day and did some s'mores things that night. His parents shared a tent while my friend and I had our own. I can't remember where the campsite was, and I'm not really in contact with my friend anymore, but 15 years later, I'm assuming it wasn't the safest place to camp, and here's why. I woke up sometime in the early morning, around 3 or 4 a.m., and immediately saw a man's face looking in the tent at us. He had unzipped the door just enough to stick his head inside. He looked absolutely insane. He had big eyes and wild hair. I was so stiff from fear I literally couldn't do anything. The man kept moving his head from left to right very slowly as if it was uncontrollable. I guess my friend could hear me breathing loudly or something because he woke up too, and he had the same reaction as I did. He just laid there in terror looking at this mysterious man. I'm not certain how long he was sitting there staring at us, but it felt like hours of shaking his head back and forth. At some point we heard a noise close by, and so did the man. He disappeared quickly, and a couple of minutes later, we got out of our tent and woke up our friend's parents. The guy was long gone, and I'm still afraid of camping to this very day. Years ago, I met a guy on a camping trip in my area. I had agreed to hang out with him after his camping trip. He drove 2 hours from his town to mine. He asked if he could leave a recently purchased tobacco water pipe at my house because his father would kill him. I told him it was cool. We used said object that day and watched a scary movie. In summation, I basically babysat him like a child, and he eventually completely knocks out on my couch an hour into the movie. I tried to wake him up, which took a good half hour. He tries laughing it off. He asked for some water and he said he'll go. I was so done at this point, I didn't want to go out with him. I didn't want to talk or anything. Huge date fail. So I started cutting him off. His water pipe was still at my place for months and he harasses me about it. I get a call on Christmas Eve. I send it to voicemail. The voicemail says he is on the way and he will be picking up his stuff. He sounded like a different person. I have guests over and don't want a scene to occur in front of my family, and it's a holiday. I text him not to come today. He says no. I tell my mom's boyfriend to deliver it for me. He does. I watch from the window as he jerks the box away and starts banging on the back of his car yelling. I saw my mom's boyfriend waving his hand around and start walking away, and the guy is still screaming. My whole family is now crowded at the window. My mom's boyfriend returns. Basically, the kid was flipping out and demanded to see me. He was still sitting out there staring into the window and texting me to come out. He goes back out and asks him to leave. Forever later, he finally does leave. I block his number. I've never heard from him again. My experience was quite a while back in my youth, as a college student taking a 2-week or so cross-country motorcycle camping trip from Illinois to California in August of 1974 before the quarter started with my then girlfriend. It was a small bike, a Honda 360. I was then a geophysics student, and I was taking this as a prospecting camping trip. I was exploring some of the abandoned gold-producing areas based on some U.S. Geological Survey publication as we drove to the West Coast, Colorado, Utah, Nevada, and California. We would visit an area, take a hike prospect around, pull off around some remote road, maybe off a road a bit, and camp in a discreet and hidden location. We would take the bike off various side roads or Forest Service roads and just pull off over a ridge or whatever and just camp for the night. We were equipped with camping gear, food, water, and enough warm clothing for a cross-country motorcycle trip in the mountains. This was all pre-internet, Google Earth, and GPS days, so we were really pretty much dead reckoning navigation. Some areas I might have had USGS maps, but not here. It happened while we camped in a remote, unforested desert area just east of Pyramid Lake in Nevada as we were crossing over from California just before we hit I-80 for our return to Illinois. We stopped just west of I-80, pulled off on a ranch or Forest Service road, found a hidden spot, and made camp. It was on the side of a vast hillside. In the valley you could see a small slice of the ribbon in I-80 in the valley, and another vast hillside rose to the east to the other side of the valley floor. I would estimate we were 10 miles west of I-80. We pitched our tent, sterno cans to heat some dinner and coffee, and sat around and looked around the vast sky and watched the golden ribbon of lights from I-80 in the valley. We bedded down for the night. At about 3 a.m., I was awakened with a freezing bone-chilling cold feeling. I was just frozen. In retrospect, I was probably anxious. I tried to awaken my companion, but she would not move, so I decided to light the sterno and maybe get some heat. I grabbed the matches, tried many times, and the matches just would not light. Growing increasingly more frustrated and thinking the matches were just damp from the usual early morning dew, I tore through my pack and found another book of matches. These would not light either. In fact, as I studied the matches, they would ignite and then just fizzle. These were the type of matchbook that had striker sandpaper on the opposite side of the matchbook as a safety feature. I kept trying and getting more frustrated as the entire matchbook lit and burned my thumb. This was the opposite side from where I was trying to light the matches. I am sure I was talking and maybe yelling some expletives at this point. This is also when I looked at my fingers and noticed a faint blue or green glow coming from my fingers, which faded over the course of 3 or 5 seconds. I was mystified, but though perhaps it was maybe some phosphor in the matches mixed with some moisture reacting to the sweat from my fingers and a little bit of the sulfur. I remember telling myself that at the time. So I was just still freezing. I was mad, frustrated, and hurt from my burn. trying to get warm laying there frustrated I just couldn't take it anymore. I jumped out of the sleeping bag and got out of the tent and noticed that something was moving. I also noticed the amazing starfield above. I decided I would start my bike and warm up the exhaust pipe and head out. The bike would not start. The quarter turned, the starter turned, and the usual crisp rate, but no pops at all. That is when frustration turned into an analysis. I sat down on the hillside and found sanity in my scientific matchbook light. I calmed down and wondered what was going on. I have never seen fingers glow, matches fizzle like that, and how did the matchbook light if there was no fire? I got peaceful and pondering. That is when I felt what they call out here the Oz moment, which I take to be the moment Dorothy leaves her black and white world and looks out through this technicolor doorway. I noticed everything around me. I could hear, almost feel, the whine of the tires on I-80. I could almost hear the hum of energy of human activity in the valley below. I could feel the generators making the electricity that lit the small golden dots of light in the valley. I would look up at the starfield, which seemed unusually brilliant, crisp, and three-dimensional. I could almost hear or feel the quiet of the vastness of space. That is when I noticed the creepy feeling that I am not alone. I felt the presence of something else. I looked around and saw nothing. I studied the feelings and I could sense or discern the presence of 4, maybe 5 wispy, blobby entities that were moving and flowing back and forth around the campsite, mostly behind me, to my side, and just out of my peripheral vision. My range of sensing them seemed to be about 20 to 30 yards. Once they would dart that far away, I would lose the sense of them. When I looked at where I perceived them, I sensed they would dart away quickly into the darkness and out of range. I never saw anything, only felt them. I also noticed that when I perceived that they brushed along the side of my back, I would then feel that bone-chilling cold sensation through my whole body. Once I figured this out, I got very peaceful. I was not afraid for my safety but more for my sanity, but my sanity was in studying this. I can say I felt that the entities were there because I was there and they were darting around, almost playing with me, but definitely in relation to me, but were not there to do particular harm. Maybe that had to decide it, just testing reactions or something. I prided myself as a scientist and a logical thinker. I was also very mechanically inclined and had a lot of experience in mechanics, including some full engine overhauls. I concluded that this was a haunting, or a UFO experience, where the engine stopped running, I had always heard about. I also wondered why engines do not fail when a mechanic is around. Well, here I am. I brought enough tools to do some mechanical work on the bike. The engine was still not starting. Well, I have the stuff to diagnose the problem. I seized on this project, perhaps a way to focus on a task and to not focus on the creepy vibes. I got up, took my toolbox off the bike, and I tried to start it again. It was a no-go. I went through the start diagnosis steps, took the plug out, hooked the plug up wire, ground the plug on the block, turned it over, got a bright snappy spark, not electrical. So, compression turned the engine over. The cylinder sure blew a lot of air through the plug hole. Not having a compression tester, I put my thumb over the plug hole. A lot of compressions. On the power stroke with the valves closed, it really sucked. My thumb hard and held the negative pressure when stopped, so the valves and rings are solid, not compression. Fuel, sure, smelled like gasoline coming from the plug hole, but to be sure, I took off the fuel line from the tank and just short of the carb. Turned off the valve and drained a little bit of gas into a little cup. I poured it directly into the cylinder through the plug hole, replaced the plug, turned it over, with no start. Not even a pop. I waited 15 minutes in case the plug was grounded with gas and tried again. No start or pop. I went back and sat down on the hillside and just looked down the valley, feeling the blobby entities darting around in the periphery and sensing the feeling and hearing of whatever the special awareness was. It was getting towards sunrise by this time. I felt that the sunrise would be salvation somehow. As the sun arose in the east, the sun was hidden by the mountain on the opposite side of the valley. As the sun continued to rise, the sun would be shining above me on the hillside as the amount of eclipse sun by the mountain in the east was reducing. When the sunshine line approached my position on the hillside, all of a sudden the blobby entities left in unison, like the wind, flowed downhill away from the sun and out of the range to sense them. I sensed they made a whoosh sound as they flew down the hill. The world, or my perception of it, all returned immediately to normal. I got up, went over to the bike, and it started first turn, as I fully expected at this point. I was no longer cold. When I discussed the night with my companion shortly after, she reported that she was awake the entire night, freezing, and was afraid I was possessed by the devil or something else, and she was deathly afraid to make a sound. She said she was paralyzed. I am sure I was talking to myself the entire time, and I was obviously acting strange, but she reported thinking I was getting tools or knives to come back to get her. P.S. We did pack up right away and bugged out, and stayed in a hotel that night. My theory I have come up with to try to explain my experience was perhaps that there was no internet then, and I came back to get involved in my life and let it fade into a memory. So I really had no opportunity to develop the theory any further. But here it is. The inoperable or quitting internal combustion engines is a common report in haunting-like encounters and UFO encounters. In addition, I had these vivid feelings of hypersensory acuteness, hyper-awareness, the sensation of freezing, the presence of another or others. These encounters have feelings of paranoia. My girlfriend thought I was possessed and was a danger, and she felt like she was paralyzed. She was terrified. Is there a central thread that could explain all these facts? I don't know personally. I would love to develop this theory further. I've just never had any time. What I do know, in my theory, is that our observations, our feeling and beliefs from these encounters are not reliable, since the sensor, our brains, are not operating correctly. We maybe have a sensor malfunction, but what I experienced was real and something caused it, and it still freaks me out to this day. Thank you for listening. I was in my mini tent at a scout camp in the coastal mountains of Oregon, Camp Cooper specifically. We and several other very experienced scouts were on an outpost camp, essentially an unsupervised overnight a handful of miles outside of the camp. Anyway, there were, I think, about 6 of us. We had all grown up in scouts and had a lot of experience in the backcountry travel and camping. So, we arrive at the spot in the clearing which overlooks a large valley. Nothing strange about that, however. After several minutes of preparing our campsite, each of us were overcome with a distinct feeling of dread and fear. Its onset was immediate and distinctly felt by each of us. I remember very clearly feeling in danger and can still remember the feeling. This was over 15 years ago at this point. Essentially, we all looked at each other, pale in the face, and said, "Do you feel that?" We all agreed that we did, and we hightailed it on out of there and back into the main camp. Ultimately, nothing happened beyond that, but I found it interesting that everyone in our group had the same feeling of utter dread, coming on at the same time in an otherwise benign setting. So this happened in the mid-90s in Florida in the Blackwater River State Park. It is only a state park, not a national one. Blackwater has a very extensive and very popular trails that connect to other trails. Although not officially a part of the Appalachian Trail, there are trails that join up to the trail. It is very popular for hiking. I and a bunch of my friends decided to go out to Carrick for a 3-day weekend. Not at all unusual, as we frequently camped at Carrick and other sites in northwest Florida. We packed up and headed out on Friday, nothing unusual for us. We were all between the ages of 16 and 22. Most of us were still in high school with the exception of my friend's boyfriend who was 22. He also was the most experienced camper and a former Eagle Boy Scout. We set up a designated primitive site in a good way, away from most other sites near the trailhead. We actually didn't realize how well traveled that particular trail was and had tons and tons of foot traffic near our tent. If we had known, we probably wouldn't have picked that site. The whole park was disappointingly packed with campers and hikers. In fact, all the parking lots were full. I guess the weather probably brought people out. Not one of us really expected what was going to happen. None of us were planning any extensive hikes really, as the goal of the weekend wasn't really an extensive hike per se, and was more about camping. But, of course, Blackwater is known for hiking trails, so we figured we would probably all be going on and off short hikes and enjoy the scenery. It was fall and the weather was gorgeous. We had purposely waited for the weather to be cool and turn. Only masochists go camping in the dead humidity and heat of summer in Florida, not to mention the bugs. We also chose that weekend because those of us in high school, most of us hated that we had to go to school, but we had Monday off. Nothing of note really happened, and we were all arriving and having a good time. We even went for a few groups and solitary hikes off the loop. Nothing noteworthy. So, anyway, long story short, I get up very early Saturday before the sun rises and decide on going for a short solo hike. I tell my tent mate what trail I'm going to be on and when I should be back. No biggie. I eat a decent sized breakfast and grab some water and head out. So I head on this trail, sunrise, and am having a great time. The trail is clearly marked with blazes and signs, landmarks with miles and miles of regularly marked intervals. It is a very well maintained, pretty heavily traveled trail. I decide I'm going to hike to the nearest landmark about 1.5 miles in and 1.5 miles back. At the time, I was a pretty experienced hiker and in excellent physical shape, as I was an athlete on more than one sport team. I could hike at a pace far quicker than most, but I allotted for 2 hours. It seemed reasonable. So, I hiked to the place and stayed there for about 10 minutes, if that, because it was disappointingly unscenic. In fact, I was actually kind of irritated because I knew there were much prettier and more scenic hikes I could have taken for the same amount of time. I felt like it was such a waste of time for my last day of the trip. I headed back. Nothing on the walk to or back seemed unusual. No bad feelings, nothing of that sort. The only thing that was odd is that I encountered not one single other hiker on the trail. I just chalked it up to it being early and a Sunday. Anyways, I got back to the campsite and everyone is obviously very upset. I asked why, and apparently everyone was freaked out because of me. I apparently not returned when I was supposed to, and they had even supposedly gone out and looked for me on the trail. When they couldn't find me on the trail, they had said that they had decided to wait at the camp for me to come back, and if I hadn't come back in an hour or so, they were going to report it to the park ranger. I found it was only early afternoon. Everyone was super pissed at me because I hadn't stuck to the plan I told my tent mate. No one ever believed my story that I had hiked to the place I said and back. Everyone for years after this was still convinced I was playing a joke on everyone and hiding or trying to be funny and denying it. It's entirely possible I could have spent more time on the trail than I thought I had and just gotten mixed up. What I still can't get my mind around is two things. How could I have possibly spent that much time hiking 3 miles? I definitely didn't linger or stop anywhere, and I 100% stayed on the trails. It was really a pretty disappointing trail, so there wasn't really anything to look at, and what would have made me slow down or get off of it? The trails were very well maintained with blazes and signs. There was no way you could step off that trail and not know it. Also, I was an athlete, so I really prime physical shape. The other thing that's bizarre is how no one could have passed me while searching on the trail for me. Honestly, I've never resolved this in my mind, and still to this day, I've never put the pieces together. I don't think anyone else has ever accepted my version of events. It kind of reminds me of missing time and like glitch in the matrix kind of stuff. It creeps me out just thinking about it. Maybe I stepped in some other dimension or something. I don't know. What do you guys think? Thanks for listening to these allegedly true, scary experiences while camping. These were some seriously intense stories. From lost time in state parks to creepy creatures stalking your campsite. I wouldn't want to be in any of those situations myself. If you have a story you would like to share on the show, submit it at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. If you liked this video, be sure to give it a like, as it helps me out a ton. If you haven't yet, subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to never miss a new video, as I upload them almost every single day, and all things natural and supernatural. If you guys ever want to talk to me or catch up with me or make sure you don't miss videos as YouTube doesn't put out notifications that much, be sure to join me on Twitter at iSwampDweller or join me on Instagram at SwampDwellerOfficial. I also have a Facebook page that you can find at facebook.com/SwampDwellerReads, and I also have a Facebook group, so feel free to join and come talk to me there. I'd love to see you all. Now, I'll see you guys soon with another creepy video.